Welcome to Business Mastery with Dawn Kennedy, your quick under 45-minute dose of expert insights and strategies to make a positive impact on your business and life. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Business Mastery Podcast. We've talked about when you need fractional executive support in your business as you're growing. So we've talked about the fractional CFO, talked about the fractional COO, I believe we've talked about the fractional CMO, that marketing officer. What about HR? HR not only can be fractional, I think people delay way too long to bring in professional human resources support as their businesses are growing. So I brought Michelle on here. We're going to talk all about HR, what it really is for, what a fractional can do to support you, and then really maybe discuss some perceptions about HR that are either inaccurate or maybe a little outdated. So, Michelle, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
Right? Can you tell everyone who you are and who you serve?
Yeah, so I am Dr. Michelle Griffin. I own Griffin Resources. And for about 6 years now, we have been supporting small to mid sized businesses with fractional HR, payroll, benefits, recruiting. And now we've added on some bookkeeping, leadership coaching, and some other asks that have kind of come in that fractional space. And small to mid sized business is the only thing they have in common. So we serve all different kinds of industries from blue collar to white collar, government agencies, nonprofits. So we have a pretty large customer and client base now. So we have about 80 clients.
Amazing. All right. So, in our fractional series, we talk about specifically sort of what the questions are that are being asked inside a business when you're like, hey, do I need to consider bringing on, a specialist or somebody who's in that particular role in the business for support? So, what are the questions that business owners are asking? Because, here, everyone who has employees at some point is making payroll, whether they're still writing physical checks or not, or if they have a bookkeeper who's cutting payroll checks or whatever. So we can say that we all know payroll is kind of part of HR, but it's a lot more than that. So what are the questions that are being asked by business owners when they need to seriously consider bringing in some HR from a specialist in a fractional role?
There's a few key points that I think companies and business owners start to feel. A lot of times they're just wearing too many hats and they just aren't performing the HR role really at all. Or it is starting to take up too much time depending on what kind of growth they're in. I've helped clients that are even, 50 to 75 people hiring, maybe one person a week, every other week. And the CFO or COO are still doing onboarding. And that's just not the best use of their expertise and their time. And, a lot of times we can help them automate the process. We can make sure they're in the right technology. So they don't even have to really pay us very much for a long period of time to help them clean it up. But they need to make sure that the executives are doing their job and being paid for their expertise, not trying to perform HR. And like you mentioned, they kind of stick with it for far too long. The CEOs will hang on to it for a long time and, try to make sure that they're complying with a lot of laws. When they start going into different states, that happens a lot sooner because they really have to make sure that their policies and procedures and the regulations that they're following are in compliant in multiple locations, and that can be really tricky. We've seen, really small companies, even under 10 people, be in 3 or 4 different states when they start going remote because they start thinking, well, I can hire talent in any location, and they don't realize the compliance that happens there. We even had a law firm recently that is only in the state of Florida decide to hire a specialist in California. And we're like, I was like, as a law firm, I'm hoping you know how complex that is. And so they, as we're kind of working through setting up new taxes, setting up new regulations, and, making sure that they can, at least comply with everything in California for that one person and, giving all of the notices and everything else that comes along with just onboarding that person and the requirements for that. So, all companies, regardless of what they are and what size they have, run into these problems without thinking about the employment law side or thinking about the HR and compliance side.
Yeah, absolutely. And the law side and the HR and compliance side, those being overlooked can be a huge vulnerability in your business. Before we started recording, we had talked a little bit about HR in the role of supporting leaders, supporting employees during things like growth periods. And specifically, you said that between the 10 and 15 employee range, lots of things change. And that is about the time where you're saying it starts to not only become overwhelming on the business owner themselves, they may not have first of all, the skill set. And second of all, the runway to get the skill set in order to be effective in human resources and what's required by law. So can we just kind of address a little bit when people say, oh, the CEO holds on to it too long? What are they holding on to? What are the specific things that you're seeing that should have, gone to a specialist before?
A lot of times companies around that size will offer benefits because they're trying to compete for large, businesses for their talent. And they'll obviously work with a broker and they'll offer these benefits. But I've seen even small companies where their broker isn't supportive and doesn't really give them a lot of time because they don't make a lot of commission off of small businesses like that. They're looking for the bigger fish to, make bigger commissions. And they kinda just set them up with a plan, and they'll just kinda hit repeat and repeat, and as long as they don't see big increases in their benefits, they don't touch anything, and they don't know how to help make sure that the employees are getting the coverages that they want, so employees start asking a lot of questions. And no one's really there to answer how a benefit is being performed, if they have claim questions, and if they get to a point where they can offer a 401k, then the company also has fiduciary responsibilities to manage that plan to make sure the plan is functioning properly. And employees need to have a place to go to ask questions and make sure that they're choosing the right selections. And if the company isn't paying attention to their benefits or they're not paying attention to their 401k, they can not only be non-compliant in certain areas, they can also just not be helping their employees out the best that they can. And the employer could be spending too much on benefits that, for their contributions than they really need to. So there's just some little areas where the CEO doesn't necessarily need to be the one digging into the trenches of all of these little questions and problems that happen throughout the year. It's really not a lot of money to fraction that out to someone who understands your plans and knows how to answer these questions that really helps them out. Um, a lot of times they have to also start setting up time off policies. They'll have to like figure out if they want to do unlimited time off. We still get asked about that. How do they manage that with someone going on a medical leave? And you've got this unlimited leave policy. What do you do about trying to set up help for someone that, needs medical coverage or something like that, or even kind of an unpaid leave of absence? How do you manage that? We got asked a lot, obviously, during COVID about how to manage some of, people going out with COVID. So all of those really became like hot topics that, leaders were trying to answer. And then honestly, the biggest thing that they try to do themselves is employee disputes. And when there's some kind of harassment complaint or even just conflict of interest that could be taking place in the office, and they try to manage those themselves. And obviously, when they don't investigate or manage those properly, then they put the company in a big liability situation for, being sued and things like that. Because even if they, didn't necessarily have a harassment situation, just mishandling a complaint can cause problems.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanna say that HR issues or employment issues are something that can sorta get along, get along, get along, get along, and then somebody just gets upset and they can go and file something, and you can't treat an employment issue like a Yelp review, right? So in a Yelp
Mhm.
review, you just, you respond back and whatever, but yeah, I hear you. Alright. So let's talk a little bit more specifically about what the HR roles are, because I think there are going to be some misperceptions that it's just payroll, benefits, answering questions. And that's what HR is really for. So I don't think they understand maybe the workforce planning aspects of it. Some of the other things that your role does in support of a company beyond the existing employees. I think that that's where maybe the specialty is misunderstood of it in the marketplace is it feels sometimes when people say, "Oh no, we'll have HR do it," that HR is almost like this like after people get onboarded, after people get hired. And actually the role is so much more than that. And it should be driving some business decisions what you bring out from
Mhm.
HR. Yeah.
Most of the time when I get asked about that, they're asking about culture and how do they build a company in a way that they intend to, but it's still more beyond that because I feel like culture also has its own, like, stigma around the word, but when you involve HR in leadership, there's ways that you can make sure that you've got the right people in the right seats. That also starts, like, obviously trying to recruit, and again, at that 10, 15 people mark, people recruit, you know, other people besides the ones they know how to recommend or referrals, and they start having to go through a recruitment process to hire strangers. And you have to still control your culture that you do want with, new people coming on board, which obviously that's a pretty easy, involvement for HR. But when HR is involved in leadership, making decisions on, the compensation structure of the company, obviously huge overhead expenditures that come with that, but making sure that we can help drive the business decisions when it comes to the oversight of human capital is really important. And also making sure that HR is involved in everything from, the management of the people, performance management. How do you handle someone that's underperforming? If you want to like right size the company and you've got a few people underperforming, how do you manage that? And if you are growing and expanding and you have budget to add new headcount, how much exactly is that going to cost the company? And most people just think, oh, well, we can have a budget to hire someone for, 60, $70,000 and we have X amount of openings. Well, what they don't take into account is the employer taxes and obviously the cost of benefits and what I call plus plus that comes with that. It's like, now take the number that you think in your head that you've budgeted 70 for and make that closer to 90. And, then they're like, oh, that's really expensive. And that's why they don't really understand turnover costing so much money and having to retrain. And so, really reminding them of all of those like financial oversights that HR can help manage and keep them on, kind of on the right track with, but also with succession planning. And if you've got people that need to grow and create departments, that's also a complete restructure of the company. That's also why we started providing leadership coaching because people would promote, workers into management positions with no management experience. And they think, well, because they were good at their job, they should be able to lead a team or lead people or manage people. And obviously that's a completely different skill set. And so we started providing coaching so that we could help those managers build those skills. And if someone wanted to grow someone into a leadership position, we could start that coaching, early on as part of their career pathing. And if you can align the compensation structure with the career pathing, you can keep people engaged and involved in their job with the company and the people grow at the same time. And HR can be a part of that entire, structure and function for, several years as it grows.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, the human capital piece. I mean, that is a function that needs to have leadership just as fast as like the CFO, right? So the person who's doing the projections and the financials, you need to have the projections and who, when, and where you need to have the right people in a job. So
Mhm.
let's talk about this sort of misperception. And you see it all the time online and on the internet and stuff that there seems to be two camps. One is, well, don't go to HR. They're only there to protect the company. And then the other one is that, well, HR, those like if you get referred to HR, that's it. Everything is just over for you. Might as well put your stapler in a box. HR is, I don't think, ever really seen as Switzerland. And the way that I like to think of HR is HR is kind of
Mhm.
Switzerland. It's like, listen, here's the borders, here's the rules and the regulations and the policies. And then obviously citizens operate within them. But can we kind of address a little bit how you see yourself supporting both the company and then the employees within that company? And that really your role is less for or against, either side. I see you more of like a neutral referee, I guess, at a game.
Yeah, yeah, and that's actually a really good way to look at it because often some people think it's one or the other, and sometimes people do think, well, they're only there and this is a lot of times with leadership, they may think HR is only there to help the employees answer their questions, kind of deal with some of the front facing information for the employees versus being a strategic leader in the organization. And it does take someone, a long time to climb that corporate ladder and be seen in HR when the company doesn't see them that way. So that can be a damaging thing for HR people to have to deal with. But then same thing with the employees thinking, oh, if I'm getting sent to HR, I'm being sent to the principal's office kind of thing. And they're there to protect the company. So yeah, a very good HR person has to do both. And if an HR person is only there to protect the company and isn't there in the interest of the employees, then they actually open up the company up to some liability because employees have a lot of rights. I honestly wish like employment law for like just for basic information should be taught in high school because there's so many laws and rights to protect the employee. And if HR tries to circumvent that and only protect the company and doesn't make sure that there are certain things happening to protect the employee, then they're obviously doing a huge disservice to the company and opening it up to a lot of liability. Like every single thing HR touches has an employment law around it. And, for example, if they don't even have to use the right language. They just have to start asking questions. And let's say they need an accommodation for a disability. And, some people don't even think of some things as a disability. Let's say migraines, for example. And someone is, calling out maybe once a month, once every other month saying, I have a migraine. And the manager starts complaining that this person is habitual or whatever. And the employee says, well, I'm sorry, I'm late again, or I need to use a sick day. It's because I have migraines. Well, HR needs to be like, let's talk about that. There's an entire interactive process that has to happen for someone to say, well, let's talk about if, does FMLA apply to them or the company? Does the ADA Act apply to them? What should we be doing to accommodate this? Do they go on intermittent FMLA and chip away at that timeline? Can they get doctor's notes? What can we do to accommodate their environment and things like that? So if the HR is only there to protect the company, they're not going to be like, well, we need to go and find out more. How much time off do they actually need? How much accommodation can we provide as a company? And if, I think some of those things may not happen if they're not thinking, let's figure out how to protect the person and the company at the same time. But yeah, you definitely have a really fine line to walk to do both.
Right. And to your point, FMLA is not required when you only have 2 employees, right? Like that becomes
Mhm.
there are trigger places that I'm sure a lot of people listening don't realize. It's like,
Mhm.
oh, I'm getting ready to hire, or oh, we have this strategic plan and we're going to open the second location. Oh, but, having a consult with HR and hiring that fractional person to come in until you need full
Mhm.
time, really can help.
And even ADA, even the Disabilities Act only has as a trigger point on a certain amount of employees. And some of that is
Right.
federal and some of that is state, and some have different requirements in different regions. And so that's the same thing. HR really has to know and understand all of the different locations. So yeah, if they open a new location, that could seriously be opening some exposure in a different, regulatory area. But yeah, FMLA traditionally, like federally, is 50 employees, and within like a 50-mile radius. And so there's a lot of times companies will still provide FMLA if they are further apart than 50 miles, just so that it's kind of a semantic, situation for companies to do that, especially when they are remote. So I usually see companies providing FMLA once they get to 50 employees, regardless of locations, but legally they don't actually have to. And then once a person, also they have to work more than, I think it's like 1,000 or like 1,200 hours in 2,080 hours. So there's a certain amount of hours that they have to hit in order to be employed and have 1 year with the company. So, yeah, it's not necessarily that if just because you work at a larger company, you automatically can have FMLA as well. You do have to like, for example, a part-time person or a seasonal person, at a large company wouldn't be applicable to them either. So there are certain things like, HR would communicate and discuss that with employees and let them know what their rights are and what benefits they do have.
Right, yeah, and on the business side, I'm sure there are people right now listening to this episode who are like, "Oh, I didn't realize that there was location, or I didn't realize that it was this." And possibly because they haven't had any problems yet with employees. So a
Mhm.
lot of times I think people think about HR as a specialization after maybe they've gotten a notice of claims, or maybe they've gotten something from the unemployment office because someone ended up getting fired, right? So it ends up being this thing where this is such an important and integral part of your company and your company's success. But I don't think we treat HR the same way that we do in business conversations, like
Mhm.
chief financial officer and who's doing the projections and who's managing the supply chain. Whereas, I think this conversation is incredibly important because you are pointing out very specifically the legal things that can get you in huge hot water and open vulnerabilities in your company. And when you're paying settlements or you're paying fines, or you're paying penalties for things you did not know, that's money that you don't
Mhm.
have to reinvest in your company or to give bonuses.
Mhm. Right, and there's even, like, a legal protection for, the employees where, there's a legal term of "should have known," and it's like, even if you were like, "Well, I didn't know," it's like, let's say someone, if they've got a hostile work environment or some kind of issues and they're kinda making some complaints, just not using so many, languages of specific words that could trigger things to someone think, "Oh, that is actually harassment." It could just be someone is favoring someone else. Some things happen and there's some complaints and not others. And, I've even talked to attorneys where they've said, they've had friends that are, CEOs saying, "Oh, I don't need you. I'm fine. I took care of it myself." And like, "Well, took care of it how?" And like, "Oh, I did the investigation myself." And I'm like, but you're part of the problem. Like,
Right.
you were the one they complained about. Yeah, so it's like you can't as employers, like, take things into your own hands, like, just it doesn't help the company if you try to handle things on your own. It can actually make the situation worse. And, protecting the company is definitely what is going to be important in a lot of those situations. But again, if you mishandle something and you treat the person unfairly and you aren't walking that fine line to protect both the employee and the company, you're also just going to, continue to problems. So it definitely needs to be part of that strategic discussion on, how are things handled. And a lot of times, when you start to have to address the situation, if you do realize there's a problem, a lot of times we get called just to say, well, now we need to start having conversations. How do we even have conversations with these employees? Can we, have some kind of mediation or some kind of discussions with them and try to bring them to, up to the conversation that leadership is trying to have with them to get them to see their side and listen to their side too. And so we end up with a lot of clients that start working with us because of those complaints and issues. And obviously, HR fractionally is much cheaper than attorneys. And so I usually tell
Oh, yeah.
people start with us and use attorneys where you need to. And oftentimes it really helps out just so that if they do need attorneys, they're prepared a lot more and we can help them document. We can help make sure that, we discuss what's discoverable, what's potentially discoverable, because then they'll start putting things in emails and in writing. And we kind of start saying, let's really be strategic about what is going on in the company and how do you handle those things before some manager sends off some email that really doesn't help the situation.
Right, right. Yeah, and I can tell you just as a lawyer, and I really do not do like employment law, but I can tell you that if somebody comes with a timeline and documentation and says, this started on Tuesday, this is what transpired, this was the last communication, it gives a very clear picture. And then you can evaluate things for like, okay, what really kind of needs to happen here? Do you need a lawyer? Is
Mhm.
this, are they going to file or whatever? But so let's get down to the nitty gritty. What can you do as a fractional HR, and why should people have numbers on speed dial?
We pretty much do everything we've been discussing and more. Just do it in a very small fractional timeline. So we I actually kind of took the billing structure from law firms as I was like trying to figure out the
Yeah.
best way to set this up for businesses. And so we round in 6-minute increments. I have no minimums and no retainers. And so we kind of discuss a budget and what needs to be performed and then compromise on what's more important and how do we accomplish what they need in the budget that they can spend. So on average, our clients spend around two to $3,500 a month. I would say 5,000 a month is very much on the high end. Most of the time, we're talking less than 5 hours a week. And so most of that, we have regular meetings with the leadership. So usually that's either weekly or biweekly. And we have, monitoring our own email box and managing some projects and things like that through, 10 to 20 hours a month. And when we are able to kind of control our budgets that way, if something comes up, we can either add more hours 1 month or come up with, a structure for those small businesses to kind of help be able to pay for those. There are ones where they've only call us when they need us, more so than having ongoing, reoccurring HR needs. And even that can be just if it's a phone call, then I literally will send a bill for, $35, $50, whatever it was. And then if we are processing payroll, we don't force anyone to change technology. We will work within the technology that they have. And we just usually ask for an internal email address and then access their systems through a secure IT process that we help them set up. And from there, that's what we will use to communicate directly to their employees if they would like us to, and everything like that. So a lot of times, if we're just processing payroll, it might be only $500, $700 a month, and then working with HR is needed. And if it's kind of both models of HR and payroll. We've got clients that will pay, maybe 1,500 a month. So we really try to keep it very affordable for small businesses. That's been our niche and what we really love doing because those are the ones that don't get to see those kinds of services. And I came from an environment that was very large HR with a company that had about 850 people across 10 states and 4 countries when I ran their HR. And I had so much resources and benefits and vendors just like, really falling at my feet. And I was like, let me take that experience and bring that to small businesses. Because I was like, I felt like that was something that I really could do. So I've been working with a lot of vendors that are willing to work with small businesses and provide that same kind of white glove service. So if it's something that is like a benefit broker or an HR tech system and customer service supports and 401k advisors, things like that, that I've been kind of building my network up to be able to say, this is who you should be talking to get that kind of service without paying much more because most of that is included in the cost of what they're setting up anyway, the benefits of the 401k, things like that. So that's kind of the what we do, but it's literally everything. And recruiting is the same way. We charge hourly for the recruiting. It's not like we're an agency. We don't go away and bring a person and say, now pay us 25% of the salary for this person, should you choose to hire them. We look more like a corporate recruiter. We are working with the managers. We're setting up the job description. We're reviewing the job posting, making sure it's compliant for those locations and helping managers to, discuss how they should go through the interview process. Should they include an assessment and really help them be able to manage on their own, and then we will take any or all of the recruiting if needed. So if they want us to do phone screens or if they want to do them, we will kind of share the responsibility and help them hire and identify the right talent. And so that's kind of part of where it's still that hourly model because it's not like we don't just leave and just expect them to pay us for that work. We want to make sure that they really could stand on their own without us. We always write SOPs. We always make sure they know how to manage the work. And if they want us to offboard, we'll leave as quickly as we kind of show up. It takes a couple days to offboard and transition work, and then we'll leave.
So let's talk about that for your role within a business, onboarding and offboarding employees. Because I think those are two areas where sometimes the compliance might be a little lax on the company side. Not for any other reason, but it's like, let's get them onboarded and let's go get them into training, right? It's like, who wants to sit through, another video course? And I don't say that flippantly, but, I worked, for a while, with the DoD and everything was, a compliance course like every 30, 60, 90 days. So let's talk a little bit about that as well, because can people hire you to do recruiting, onboarding, and basically offboarding, as their
Mhm.
person who is going to have that holistic look at, because here's the thing, when you're offboarding certain people, do you have to restructure? Do you have other roles? Did you file a replacement? Are they only temporarily gone? Um, do you see what I'm saying? I don't know exactly how to ask
Mhm.
the question because I think it is somewhere where I see quite a bit of compliance lax is not giving
Mhm.
notices on the last day, right? Not giving them a receipt for the computer that they turned in, even if they quit voluntarily.
Mhm.
So can we talk a little bit like, is that available through what you do?
Yeah, yeah, and it's not the same person that would do everything from start to finish. We do specialize and have specialists, and oftentimes we've actually seen where a certain part of the division of the company or my people will have pain points because they're like, they're not doing this other thing and it's making my job harder. So, for example, if we're doing their recruiting and we hand them over to the company and we're not doing HR or onboarding, and that person doesn't have the right resources, they'll experience turnover. And it's not because we're, not helping hire the right people. It's because the company's not prepared to bring that person on. And we've seen that often where we'll give them the feedback that, you will follow up with them. We'll do, 30, 60-day check-ins and let you know what happens and what they're saying. But if we're not involved to help with the solution, all we're doing is just kind of giving them information. And we do have a lot of clients where all we're doing is recruiting and we're not doing anything else for them. And when we do the HR and the onboarding and the recruiting, we obviously talk amongst ourselves. We have really good communication structures. And we do have clients where we also do the payroll in addition to all of those. So as they're onboarding, we're updating and make sure like payroll is updated, all of the, I-9 and E-Verify and all the actual compliant documents are being done. But when we get control of HR and have access to the HRIS system, we will use the automation that we can help set up so then they can continue to onboard correctly. And when they add on new states, then all of that work has to be all done all over again. And oftentimes they won't know that and they won't know how to make sure to, stay compliant in different states and different areas have, all these different rules and regulations. But yes, we basically kind of make sure that, the process and procedures are being followed. We have checklists for onboarding people. We have checklists for offboarding people because obviously that is going to be unique for every client and for every industry. And, especially like you mentioned, if they have equipment in some locations, you can, if you have policies and procedures about making sure that you are able to collect that or you can deduct, funds for that. If you don't have a policy that says you can deduct funds, you can't. And, if they have to sign off on that and you can't pay them less than minimum wage. So you can't withhold a whole check saying, until you return your equipment, I'm not paying you. You can't do that in any state. Um, so we really help and make sure that, when people are offboarded, we communicate with IT, we communicate with, obviously all of the leaders and the employees, and we work with them, do you have keys? What equipment do you have? How do you return it? Within what timeline do you have to return it? And things of that nature, and what you can and can't do about, holding paychecks or withholding funds. And so oftentimes, we will communicate with attorneys and things like that when if there's severances involved and if there's, if there is a RIF, which is a reduction in force, which can also lean into some other regulatory issues with certain layoffs and things like that too, depending on the size of the company. They get very regulated and pretty complicated. So those are some of the things where, we help in that entire realm.
That's amazing. So I want to say that this is probably the episode where we've used the word compliant and heavily regulated the most, I think, in all the years of podcasting, because this really is a huge business vulnerability that if you are not in compliant or if, I got audited last year in the coffee company by Workman's Comp. I was one of 10,000 random audited companies. Okay, so our ducks were in a row. Great, knock wood for now. But, maybe, in the future, right? I could be hit with something that I don't feel as secure or confident about. But I wanted to be very, very clear to everybody out here that the fractional HR should not be the last leadership position hired, right? So when we're talking about those skills caps and where you need specialist support, this maybe needs to be one of the top three, maybe before the chief marketing officer. And I don't say that because I don't love marketing. I say that because I don't know if a bad Google post is going to potentially cost you $50,000 in fines. Um, where certain, HR things can be devastating to the company. So I really
Mhm.
appreciate you being very honest here, and explaining like all of the places that touch employees and employers that do need to have some support and some eyeballs on it to make sure that everything is working well. A good business can't operate without good people. A corporate entity is only made up and structured of the people that are actually doing the work. So, where can people find you? What are your links? Where can we lurk and stalk you on social media? Stalking, obviously, just in passing. Not really.
In a good way.
In a good way.
The best way is definitely yeah, the best way is definitely the website. So all of our information is at griffin-resources.com. And that does have our direct contact information on that to real people. And actually, if you do the chat feature there to even ask a question, it goes directly to our sales administrator. And then usually she pings me if it's, a question, that kind of stuff too. So we do have people that'll just randomly kind of chat and ask questions if something is necessary or needed, or if they can, kind of usually just check in and see if it's something we can help them with. And then obviously on LinkedIn, and my information there is pretty easy to find. So,
Okay,
but
so
our contact information is right there on the website.
we're gonna put all that down in the show notes and in the descriptions on YouTube as well, so that you can find um, Michelle. Whether you tune in the day we release or 3 years later, you'll be found. My last question is: are you serving all 50 states?
Yes. We don't currently have a client in Alaska or Hawaii, but it's only because our clients haven't gone there, not because we haven't. But yes, we do serve all 50 states, and we do have specialists for those, California, New York, Illinois, New Jersey, some of the much more complicated states. We have specialists for state specialists needs as well. So that's also another common problem that people tend to
Yeah.
run into is those specific states.
Right, exactly. All right. So hopefully this episode really kind of honed into the importance of not just treating HR as payroll, right? So but actually looking at this function in leadership as a critical component of your company's growth and success. So thank you so much for being here today to share all of this.
I appreciate it. Thank you. And hopefully the listeners and entrepreneurs out there definitely learned maybe a thing or two and feel need to reach out. So thank you so much for
Yeah.
having me.
Yes, definitely. All right. We'll talk to y'all next time on the next episode of the Business Mastery Podcast. Take care. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Business Mastery Podcast. If you want to learn more about me, you can go to DawnKKennedy.com, and you can now check us out on YouTube, as well as, of course, any of your favorite platforms that host podcasts. Take care.